Few modern rock bands have had a trajectory quite like Arctic Monkeys. They were once the poster children of indie rock, scrappy kids from Sheffield who set the world on fire with witty lyrics, jagged guitars, and an almost mythological rise powered by the internet. In 2006, they weren't just a band, they were a movement. They broke sales records, inspired a generation, and stood at the forefront of a scene that felt unstoppable. But fast forward to today, and the conversation around Arctic Monkeys has shifted. Their last two albums divided fans, alienated some of their core base, and left many asking the question, what happened to Arctic Monkeys? From the sweaty clubs of Sheffield to headlining Glastonbury, from record-breaking debuts to polarizing experiments, we'll chart the career of one of the most important British bands of the 21st century. And along the way, we'll examine whether this is truly a downfall, or simply a band refusing to stay in one lane. To understand the Arctic Monkeys story, you have to start in Sheffield in the early 2000s. A group of school friends, Alice Turner, Jamie Cook, Matt Helders, and Andy Nicholson, were just teenagers when they first picked up instruments. They weren't prodigies, they weren't born into the industry, and they didn't even play particularly well at first. What they did have was an obsession with music, a sharp sense of humor, and a knack for writing songs about the world they actually lived in. The name Arctic Monkeys came from Jamie Cook before the band even really existed. A bit of a joke, a name that sounded almost too strange to stick, but it stuck. In 2003 and 2004, they started gigging around Sheffield, playing pubs and small venues. What made them different was how quickly the audience latched on. After shows, the band would hand out burned CDs of their demos. Some fans uploaded those tracks onto MySpace, back when the platform was exploding in popularity, and suddenly Arctic Monkeys weren't just a local band. They were an online sensation, one of the first bands to blow up in the age of social media. The early songs were sharp, funny, and brutally relatable. Tracks like Fake Tales of San Francisco poked fun at wannabe rock stars. While I Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor captured the messy energy of nights out in northern England. By 2005, things escalated quickly. Independent label Domino Records signed them and the buzz was deafening. Their gigs started selling out before they even had an album out, and when their debut finally arrived, it didn't just meet the hype, it demolished expectations. When Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not dropped in January 2006, it didn't just become the fastest-selling debut in British history, it completely shifted the landscape of modern rock. In its first week, the album sold over 360,000 copies in the UK alone, smashing Oasis's previous record. To put that into perspective, this was still an era when people were buying CDs in droves, but even then, no one expected a scrappy group of Sheffield teenagers to outsell household names. The press hailed it as the rebirth of British guitar music, and suddenly Arctic Monkeys weren't just a buzz band, they were the band. After the whirlwind of 2006, the pressure on Arctic Monkeys was immense. Their debut had shattered records, and now everyone wanted to know if they could do it again. Bands that blow up that quickly often face a sophomore slump, but Arctic Monkeys weren't about to slow down. In April 2007, just 15 months after their debut, they released their second album, Favorite Worst Nightmare. Right out of the gate, it proved they weren't a one-trick pony. If the first record was scrappy and observational, the second was leaner, sharper, and more aggressive. Tracks like Brainstorm hit like a lightning bolt, frenetic, urgent, and perfectly designed to open stadium shows. Meanwhile, songs such as 505 and Fluorescent Adolescent show Turner evolving as a songwriter, balancing humor with something more bittersweet. Fans who thought they'd only ever be a night out in Sheffield band suddenly realized the Monkees could do mood, depth, and atmosphere. Critics embraced it too. The album debuted at number 1 in the UK, selling over 200,000 copies in its first week. While the numbers didn't quite match their record-breaking debut, it cemented Arctic Monkeys as more than just hype. This was a band with staying power, and the live shows, they went from rowdy club gigs to some of the biggest stages in the world. 2007 saw them headline Glastonbury, a staggering achievement for a band that had only existed in the public eye for a couple of years. There, they played to tens of thousands, proving they weren't just a phenomenon on paper, they were a real rock powerhouse. Their reputation as one of the most exciting live acts of their generation was now set in stone. But behind the scenes, things weren't entirely smooth. Original bassist Andy Nicholson had left the band in 2006, unable to keep up with the breakneck pace of their sudden success. He He was replaced by Nick O'Malley, who quickly fit into the lineup. While Nicholson's departure marked the end of their original lineup, O'Malley's arrival brought stability, and the Monkees pushed forward without missing a beat. By the end of the favorite worst nightmare cycle, Arctic Monkeys had achieved something rare. They proved they weren't just a product of hype, but a genuine force capable of evolving. They had the sales, the accolades, and the live presence to back it up. The question now was, where do you go when you've already conquered Britain, headlined Glastonbury, and become global stars before you're even 23? For Arctic Monkeys, the answer was to take a left turn. By 2013, Arctic Monkeys had already evolved several times, but it was with AM that they hit their global peak. Released in September of that year, the album fused rock, R&B, and hip-hop influences into a sleek, moody sound that made them international stars. The single, Do I Wanna Know, became their signature track, cracking the Billboard Hot 100 and amassing over 1 billion views on YouTube. AM debuted at number 1 in the UK and number 6 in the US, becoming their most commercially successful record and earning widespread critical acclaim, with NME and Rolling Stone both ranking it among the decade's best albums. On stage, Turner reinvented himself as a slick, leather-clad frontman, leading the band through massive headline sets at Glastonbury, Coachella, and arenas worldwide. By the mid-2000s, Arctic Monkeys had achieved the impossible. They were no longer just indie darlings from Sheffield, but one of the biggest rock bands on the planet. Yet with the summit conquered, the next step in their career would prove to be their most divisive. By 2018, fans had waited 5 years for a follow-up to AM. But when Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino arrived, it felt less like an Arctic Monkeys record and more like an Alex Turner solo project. Gone were the riffs and anthems, replaced with piano-led lounge songs and a surreal concept about a hotel on the moon. Critics praised its ambition, but many fans were alienated, disappointed by the absence of the swaggering rock that made the band famous. Streaming numbers and setlist reactions confirmed the divide. While it debuted at number 1 in the UK, none of its tracks had the cultural reach of AM. 4 years later, the car doubled down with orchestral cinematic sounds and abstract lyrics, earning more critical acclaim but leaving fans split once again.
Thinking about how funny I must look, trying to adjust to what's been there all along. With the bold kiosk lady and a sleepy amigo.
By the time they headlined Glastonbury in 2023, reactions were mixed, with some praising their evolution and others lamenting the loss of their earlier fire. The downfall of Arctic Monkeys wasn't a collapse in ability or relevance, but a deliberate reinvention that fractured their audience, transforming them from global icons into a more polarizing niche act. Arctic Monkeys didn't collapse because they couldn't write songs anymore. They didn't implode from scandal like so many other bands. Instead, their downfall was a slow, intentional drift away from what made them global icons. In chasing reinvention, they lost a portion of the audience that once propelled them to the top. For some, that's a tragedy. The band that gave us AIM abandoned the sound that made them huge. For others, it's the mark of true artistry, refusing to repeat themselves, even at the cost of mass appeal. Looking back at the Arctic Monkeys' career, it's hard not to be struck by just how rare their story is. They weren't manufactured, they weren't propped up by a major label machine. They were a group of Sheffield lads who turned demos and word of mouth into one of the most explosive debuts in music history. In the mid-2000s, they captured the spirit of a generation, became the face of indie rock, and somehow grew into one of the last truly massive guitar bands to dominate global culture. Their downfall, if you can call it that, didn't come from the usual places. It wasn't scandal, burnout, or creative stagnation. Instead, it came from their refusal to stay in one lane. After reaching their commercial and cultural peak with AM, Arctic Monkeys could have easily cashed in with another record of riff-heavy anthems. Instead, Alex Turner led the band down a stranger, riskier path. With Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino and The Car, they traded mass appeal for artistic exploration. For some fans, this felt like betrayal. The band that once wrote songs for messy nights out was now musing about science fiction hotels and cinematic ballads. For others, it was proof that Arctic monkeys had outgrown their early image, that they were still evolving instead of becoming their own tribute act. But whichever side of the divide you fall on, there's no denying that the universal excitement that once surrounded Arctic monkeys has faded. They remain a respected, arena-filling act, but no longer the cultural phenomenon they once were.